Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Murasaki in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 21, The Crow Gives Chase. For the eyes, a world of blurs. Rain cascaded down his cheeks and fell about him in slow motion whilst he flashed through the forest. Autumn was sweet, but relentless, its storms did not stop. He was southbound, not easing up his speed. He had received another letter from May that asked for his aid in tracking down an S-class missing nin. He knew better than to trust her a trap, but curiosity, impatience, too, was getting the best of him. This was his chance, the chance he had been waiting for. He could still turn it all in his favor by coaxing something out of her. She was quite fond of him, and if that was what it took, he was more than happy to play along. He expected this to be a day's journey. Suijutsu and Yugo were sent to Rain ahead of time to make sure Zabuza and Haku were well hidden, away from Leaf's and Mist's eyes. If all went well, he would make it back before his brother suspected his absence. He had few Umbu training missions in the forests to the north and confidential matters to handle. He had his hands full. And as the forest sang, he felt the violent and distressing palpitations of the heart. His brother's words, Rain ringing in his ears. "Sasuke, I forbid it," he spoke, his face throwing away the veil of gentleness. "Do you understand? You are not to accept any more requests from her." "But, Nii-sama, I could. Did you not hear me?" His voice came out harsher than Sasuke had expected, and he fell silent almost immediately. "The mess your hopeless subordinate created has yet to be cleaned up. Do not make matters worse." Sasuke raised his eyes to look upon his brother's face. Morning, tempered by autumn, did not seem to touch the appearance of hardness in his fine features. He sat behind the large table, his appraising eyes running over Sasuke, watching not seeing, and wandering off to gaze at the world beyond the window and then returning to look back at him. It was hopeless to argue with him any longer. Silence was always his friend when his brother refused to listen, lend his ears to his worries. To Sasuke, Itachi was almost whimsical in his display of affections. "Do not make this like last time. I am warning you," he spoke, and Sasuke could almost feel the whiplash of his uncaring tongue. Then he stood up and walked around the table, and Sasuke could do nothing but lower his head and look at the smooth wooden floor. "Leave it be," he spoke, as coldly as he could, close to him, and the matter was closed that day. Yesterday was the past, today, a new present. A curl of childlike impishness appeared in his smile, innocence in the face that passed into boyish purity for few joyous moments. Time had visited upon his past and robbed him of childhood. If he could, he would take back what was his from time and regain the honor his family lost. Sometimes, he wondered, did his beloved brother care about his disgraced parents? Sasuke's mouth twisted down in grief, a look of sorrow coming into his pale face. Kissed with mercy by Rain, Autumn was a child who liked being loved. This thought had haunted him for years. His brother avoided this subject as though it was an aberration, a plague that would ruin his reputation. He had to force Itachi into the matter this time every time. It took time, but little by little, his brother came around. Seeing Sasuke in peril was something he could never stand for. They were always this way even when they were children. Itachi would watch over him when he played in the clearing outside the Uchiha village, where the graves of his kin resided, a memory created amongst the lost that would always be memory. He was young then, stumbling about helplessly, struggling to stand firm and find strength in his inexperienced legs. He fell down over and over again and scrambled to his feet to reach his brother, with hands held out from his body, calling out to him, and Itachi always caught him before he stumbled any more. The struggles against childhood's grasp and the thrill to tread into adult life were lovely, but was adulthood always so ugly? When Sasuke got hasty, he would fall down and skin his knee on the stones. He wailed from pain. Itachi rushed to him in such moments and tenderly tended to his wounds and carried him home on his back. In the past, he learned a lot from his brother. Days came, days went, they did not remain the same. He learned to walk, run, make shurikens at a young age. His brother taught him many things. Quietly, time melted away into untouchable imageries, blurs of moments, stains of memories. Now, he was a fresh-limbed youth, and looking back at that time felt like peering at a mirage, wrapped in fabric of seductions. You could chase and chase, but could never quite catch it. Childhood's dreams were meant to turn unattainable Mimi cries for Sherry Nons. Scratch scratch scratch. Loss was a subtle thing that came back with a searing force when old wounds were picked at in earnest, let loose a steady flow of memories one by one. The rush of them would flood him, trapping his spirit, trampling his naivete beyond recognition. Then he would lock them back up again, cleaning up his consciousness like a mischievous child who knew how to hide away his faults, knew how to hide away the toys he had broken, leaving no mark of that stinky muck. Ah, the act of locking it up and letting the beast run young, wild, and free. Oh child, you're born young, wild, and free. An obscene routine, a savage side that he learned to embrace, and his brother had learned to embrace all of him had he hoped. He loved him for what he was, not what he wanted him to become. At least, that was what Suzuki imagined. And a child's dreams were lovely, but there were times when Suzuki was to be disciplined. When he wavered, Itake harshly steadied him. He was a shadow behind his back. Sometimes, he haunted him, forced him into submission. The terror that thrived in Suzuki from his illusions, perhaps, was eternal. Twitching, Suzuki's right eye soaked up fear at the sight of a crow sitting up ahead on a branch, thwarting his path. Itake's name sprang to his lips, and, as though awaiting his name, darkness descended on him akin to animals out to maim. Black dropped upon his eyes that could see nothing. He threw his hand out to protect himself from the impact, which was inevitable, and crashed against the tree straight ahead. It did not quite break his forward motion, he toppled sideways and tumbled down, but this time, thankfully, he landed on his feet. Suzuki jerked his head up to stare at the sky blackened by countless of the accursed birds his brother was unnaturally fond of. Crows. They caught and circled overhead as if he was fresh and frail, and they longed to pick and poke at his body, to take his eye out, to tear open his pretty mouth in delight. He made to draw his weapon when a vibrating, swelling voice startled him. Disobedient. I told you to leave it be, Itake whispered, and his voice beat against the walls invisible around him. It was not even a whisper anymore, too potent and heavy. He was already inside Tsukuyomi. The murder of crows could not save him, a spectacle they had come to witness, singing. Suzuki did not know how to speak, his tongue was useless as a rusted sword against this foe, whom he loved, and he was too afraid to possess any voice. Wherever he darted his eyes, dismal downs of crows greeted him, flying endlessly into the graying horizon robbed of its joys. Droplets hung in midair, pearl-like and eerie. In this world Itake loved to drag him in for heart-to-heart. And punishments. Nni-sama, Suzuki whispered and bowed his head. His lips shuddered from fear on his face. Found your voice? You are insolent, Itake spoke from beyond the mist. At the sound of his voice, it rippled and ripped open the way martyrs did to let his war instruments through, from end to end. He was still in his umbu uniform and stood upright in that same arrogant posture his body knew by design. Suzuki raised his head to peer deep into the mist, his brother's face clay toy-like, too white, and devoid of the tenderness he cherished. Immediately, he lowered his eyes, standing under the weight of his older brother's deathly gaze. You thought I would never find out? He asked in a voice that seemed to expand painfully towards him, it produced such ghastly effects with its potency. No, Nii-sama, he stopped, voice lost, tongue unable to chase and catch the words that ran through his mind one after the other, wayward children lost in winter's forest. No, of course you did, Itake spoke in mock sincerity. You think yourself to be too clever. Nii-sama, He raised his eyes to look at his brother standing about 30 feet from him. Suzuki blinked and he was staring into the deepest crevices, crafted by shurikens, in his brother's reds, a few inches from his. The burning intensity of Itake's gaze lowered his eyes against his will, and he lapsed into silence. Do not talk back, the voice spoke, floating to him afterwards from Itake's unmoving lips, his swiftness was ahead of his speech. I should leave you in here. You do not respond well to my love, Itake spoke again, and his breath, colder than the breath autumn could conjure, fanned out on Suzuki's forehead. Suzuki's throat was burning, heart thundering. Oh, what a shame that he was caught again, without another gain. The sounds resonated through his every vein, every tendril, every part of his mortal coil as though it was a sacred space made to resonate with his brother's sinister hymns. This was not the first time he would be punished this way. His brother had a cruel streak, but Suzuki's unruly child, his spirit, sought that rebellious nature and set it free. Oh, there was love and freedom, beauty and pleasure, but nothing was free, not even joy for thee. He was accustomed to this false sense of freedom, this humiliation at his brother's hands. He acted out, he wanted to be the wild one. The thrill of testing his brother and his own limits had made a devil of him. Deep down, he knew this was coming deep down, his own little devil craved for this delicious punishment to whip it raw, break its pride so that it could carve out its own with that much intensity in reaction. Sasuke was always at odds with himself. That night, wandering amidst the stickiness of guts, feet sloshing through blood, had robbed the boy child of his pleasures forever. He was lost, gone. Its last whimpers vanished, lost to the night that would never come. Time was a thief. Itake's illusions scratched open the long-forgotten wounds, and his adult spirit crushed into a child's spirit that crumbled before his brother's own brand of discipline. Sasuke's legs buckled under his weight, and he fell down onto his knees. Red bubbled up to cover his eyes, like little fingers that allowed him a momentary luxury, to fight back in a customary manner, to break free, even though he did not will for this to happen. Like children, his Sharinans were as instinctively rebellious as he. With his child unleashed upon his mind, he opened his mouth and cried out hoarsely, "Nii-san, I am sorry." He bent down his head, his nose touching the dirt, red as his moon-touched village's streets, hands trembling at his sides, a mere boy child lost and helpless in illusions. No sound came from Itake. He stood over him, and, very slightly, his right hand trembled once in the grasp of emotion to reach out and touch Sasuke, whimpering at his feet, begging him to stop this trick that was a habit to his nature. Itake clenched his hand tight. It had to be done, Sasuke needed to be disciplined, it was for his own good. He had already killed Fu out of revenge. How far was he willing to go? Itake did not desire to see Sasuke tread that far from his shadow. Never that far, not an ink drop too far. Itake had to be his shield, even if it meant protecting him from his own demons, even if it meant making him suffer to halt his steps. Truth was never a necessity, reassurances were. For a moment, he closed his eyes when he saw blood, coming profusely from Sasuke's eyes, fall down on the dirt that drank it up with relish, thirsty for its taste for ages. Sasuke's body bent and broke in the siblings' world that was joyless, heartless, colorless. I can't see. His voice wobbled in terror when he brought his shaking hands up to his face, his countenance a bizarre mask of red and white. He could see nothing other than an endless devouring dark. "I can't see," he said, voice too rough, and blinked rapidly to look around as if searching for light in the night that had fallen down over his world. His lips, ashen like his countenance, dappled red as he stared up with uncertainty in his eyes. He stood up, legs shaking under his own weight as if unaccustomed to his youth, still caught in the delightful trap of childhood. "I can't," he broke off and lurched sideways, a child regaining his balance. Can't see. Nis-san, I can't." His voice was catching in his throat. He clenched his teeth, weeping, lost, pitiful child. Red flowed unopposed down his throat now, a network of eerie veins appearing on his white skin. Itake turned his head away. Whilst in the possession of the blackest heart, he could not bear to look upon his brother's visage, ruined by blood, tears, and fear, any longer. He stood quietly in the rain, viciously aloof. Not moving and letting this terror consume his brother, who tried to wander off deep into the forest in search of his eyes' light, a somnambulist trapped in his own little world. He did not make it far and crashed to the ground, exhausted and spent for the day. He had lost consciousness. Itake slowly walked to him and knelt by his side. He placed his hand on Sasuke's brow and brushed his thumb against his bloodied cheek. "Sasuke, would you forgive me?" he whispered and reached down to pick him up. The rain stopped. Itake looked down to see raindrops tracing defiant paths through the blood cooling fast on Sasuke's face. Letting out a heavy sigh, he flashed out of the forest with Sasuke. Itake was done for the day. The missions would have to wait. He sat on the tatami mat, with Sasuke lying on the futon. He had a high fever, a foreseen consequence of Itake's actions. Sasuke sighed and moaned in distress. His cracked lips were parted in pain. Itake had spent the last 15 minutes wiping clean Sasuke's neck and breast. The red was gone, leaving behind the redness of skin where he had used the cotton cloth. In spite of Itaka's gentleness, the cloth's harshness had left a reminder of his secrets. Now, only one side of Suzuki's face was left untouched with the marks of punishment. It looked as if someone had painted that half as a crude joke, but Itaka found no humor in it. That side of it. It caused him worry. He squeezed the cloth, which was submerged in a vessel filled with cold water before, and placed it on Suzuki's cheek. Suzuki hissed and felt a sudden assault of biting chill on his skin. He was out of strength. How helpless, to be a child in youth. All over again. How dangerous, his nature's rhythms. All Itaka could do was clean it all up. Itaka-sama, you stopped and drew up short at the sight before him, Itaka, wiping away the red marks from the side of Suzuki's face. What happened to him? Is he? Let me worry about my brother, Itaka cut him off in his typical flat tone of voice. The subject was closed. Did you bring what I asked of you? Yu's curious eyes wandered slightly towards Suzuki, but Itaka's disapproving gaze pulled them back to his face. A little absent-mindedly, he nodded and extended his arm to give the scroll to Itaka. It's just like you suspected, Itaka-sama. She's been going on missions with Sai's squad, he began and, out of a sense of duty and obedience, clasped his hands behind his back, and without Suzuki-sama's knowledge. 25S rank missions. Itaka spoke with careful softness and ran his lazy eyes down the scroll. So many and without Suzuki's approval. Why? He asked himself, deep in thought. Curiosity subtly changed his countenance. He looked at the old lantern that glowed with an eerie red light. A pink moth fluttered about it, eager to meet its death upon the flame. I told Sarizawa-san to eliminate the chakra from the Hokage's office like you asked. Karen went with him to make sure nothing remained behind, Yu said and cast his gaze on Itaka's umbu jacket that lay beside him. His sword was sticking out from under it, catching the lantern's red glow. It gave the illusion of a heated metal that had yet to meet water, to give it a good temper. Leave, he whispered, with near-careless softness in his voice, as if making sure it would not rouse Suzuki. Yu bowed and left. He brushed Suzuki's hair aside and pressed his thumb into Suzuki's cheek, with love going into his fingers. Yes, he was just a child. Look, Suzuki, he broke off and gently pried Suzuki's right eye open with his thumb and forefinger, an autumn moth. You like them, no? He bent his head down till his lashes touched Suzuki's, his manjikyo beating back to life, and gripped Suzuki's senses in his sleep, his hair cascading around his brother's face like a curtain, hiding it away from every eye. Precious child. A red tear sliding down Suzuki's cheek slowed down, obstructed by time's sluggishness. In dreams, his voice lost its cold nature and changed into a warm one from a boy's mouth. Look, Suzuki, he said and stopped dandling a 3-year-old Suzuki and pointed at the moth flying just above them, an autumn moth. You like them, no? Suzuki hopped off his knee and leapt up to catch it, but it was so far away from him. Look, it's going for purple lilies, your favorite. He said with a smile and picked Suzuki up in his small arms. He, too, was only 11. Suzuki let out a little laugh and rested his head against Itaka's breast and heard his heart's falseness, looking out towards the vast field of purple lilies set a-quiver by the pleasant autumn wind. Itaka wiped away Suzuki's tear, forehead pressed against Suzuki's, and his eye held its powerful gaze, his lips still moving. Look, it is going for purple lilies, your favorite. A youthful laugh full of innocence rumbled in Suzuki's throat, and his dry lips quivered with a smile just like a child, sleeping and dreaming a beautiful dream. Chapter 22, Now this team is mine. From autumn's bosom, rains came and went, came again, and from this far, rocks by the shore had gained new colors, bottoms of pebbles, coated with a loamy material, a green layer encrusted the large stones' tops like grass. Lake waters cracked their surface and left them withered. At dusk, horizon was a discontinuous and abrupt boundary. The air dispersed as he breathed out a sigh, his breath coming out as white smoke. His feet navigated amongst the countless pebbles along the shoreline that seemed to run up north for miles on end. As mist rose upwards and outwards from the waters, his blue eyes deepened into sapphire. He wrinkled his nose and sneezed. Autumn always made him allergic, or maybe it was that damned fungi he touched earlier out of curiosity. He even smelt it. He flashed his eyes on the girl standing not far from him, his face had that impatient look. How long do I have to do this? He shouted louder than he should have and clenched his fingers to stop the chakra flow to his right hand. The rays non-fizzled and disappeared. Lightning fulminated overhead, and a burst of wind disturbed the calm ripples on the lake and broke the mist. We should go back to the house, Karen, Niji said and put a hand over his head to shield himself from the drizzle. Suzuki-sama said that he shouldn't push himself. Stop treating me like I'm a child, Naruto said over the shushing wind. I can hear you, right? He jerked his head away in a huff. Naruto, I'm just... Quiet, Naruto. Karen cut across Niji and fingered her glasses. I'm tired of your complaining. We're going to do what Suzuki said. It's almost evening, and you've made some progress today. Pick up your little bag, we're done for the day. Naruto fixed his angry deep blue eyes on her. And where's Suzuki? He hasn't come here for nearly a week, he paused and breathed in loudly. I've got to talk to him about something. Suzuki-sama's on leave, Niji explained and jumped down from a large rain-washed stone. He won't be back on duty for a while. Did Itaka say that? Naruto asked, and a faint emotion danced across his face, but he guarded it well. Yes, Naruto, he said that. I don't know why you keep forgetting that he's the captain of all the squads. He told us that he'll be handling some of Suzuki-sama's missions, Niji said and shoved his hands into his pockets. Naruto turned his head away. I know you're upset, but someone had put you under a powerful genjutsu. We don't know who did that and why. You need to stay calm. I'll bet he said that, Naruto mumbled. Niji's words fell on deaf ears as he did not seem to have heard anything he said afterwards. He was in a pale rage, soft whiskers standing up on his cheeks. His chest tightened, with something turning inside, but the feeling subsided quickly. Karen narrowed her eyes. The seal was almost done, but he was slipping again because of that erratic temper. Suzuki had spun a story of a genjutsu. Naruto and Hinata did live on Leaf's boundary, some Rouges attacked him and took with them a scroll. It was a simple story, and Niji was told to treat this in an official manner. Karen jumped down and scanned the area. She could not sense anything for more than 10 kilometers in all directions. They were in the clear. Thunder sounded again, louder and insistent. She cast her pinkish eyes on the house that stood tucked under a cluster of bowing trees. When touched by wind, their boughs shook and shivered. It had not been kind to their young. Suzuki and Itaki used this house when they traveled further up north to hunt. It was small and clean and had a garden at the back. It had enough tools for Niji and Karen to use just in case if someone found them. Its roof was cracked through by many purple lilies crawling out from the crevices. Rains had lashed it good, but, underneath the wooden structure, the roof had a waterproof material, so they were safe till Suzuki would, inevitably, get furious over the slow speed of repairs. Her lips curled down in a deep scowl. Suzuki had left her in quite the mess. Whoever was stirring that thing inside Naruto wanted him to lose control and die. It would be easier to kill the love-starved woman, Suzuki suspected, but he wanted to do this the hardest way. Pulling away from the thoughts, she walked to Naruto and Niji, her sandals sinking into the mud. Karen scanned the area again, her senses hitting the bodies of each and every animal she could find. There were several birds sitting about on the branches some 100 feet away. The forest was quiet, and disturbed by rain, it gave the illusion of being alive. Naruto was still protesting. Niji possessed the patience of a saint, she thought. I'm just saying, Naruto protested again and raised his hands into the air. Karen cut across him, her tone of voice sharp, fingers squeezing her arms. Pick up your bag, Naruto. We're leaving. Naruto spun around to face her, features contorting, teeth clenching. She was just pushing him over to the edge. You're not my boss. He hissed, and she saw something ripple his features in the subtlest of ways, but it got defeated. Stop ordering me around. A smile broke Karen's face. The seal was done. She turned her gaze on Niji, who was staring at Naruto with a bit of disbelief on his face. These temper tantrums were new to him, but it did not matter as long as she was ahead of her foes. It was just a matter of playing the game right. Karen touched her glasses out of habit again and looked through the raindrops coursing down the frame of her glasses. You've regained a bit of control over your chakra, she began and took 3 short breaths to warm up her body. That's enough for the day. Do you want to get sick again? Don't push yourself. Take it slow. Naruto brought his gaze upon her, an unfriendly gaze, but he did not say anything. Grudgingly, he picked up his bag and marched to the house. Niji stared after him. He had a pink hue in his cheeks now. He did not seem to enjoy the cold. I've never seen Naruto this upset. He paused and squared his shoulders and rubbed his hands together as though he was nervous. I wonder when Sasuke-sama will get back. I want to know what kind of genjutsu it was. He had an air of uncertainty about him, and then he slowly walked behind Naruto. This was not going as smoothly as Sasuke had planned. The seal blocked out the chakra inside Naruto from his Byakugan, a secret to his eyes, but how long would this seal last? Karin frowned. She had never made something like this before. Sasuke had just crossed the first hurdle. Doubt weighed down heavily on her heart, the feeling compounded. She chose not think much of it and cast a reassuring gaze to the lake, as if it was her secret bearer, and followed Niji. A week passed by in dreaming. Hinata had not seen Sasuke standing under the Uchiha Manor's roof made her realize that even more. Itaki had asked some squad members to bring their reports in. Sasuke had left a lengthy mission and duty roster for the whole week. She went on her first mission with Yu, together with 2 other Chunins, to the border as a guard for an official from the capital. The mission went better than the previous one. Her eyes proved to be a valuable asset in Niji's absence, who had gone off on an undisclosed mission with Karin and Naruto. She had not seen him for more than a week. Breathing out loudly, she looked at the red light, coming from an old lantern on Itaka's office table, overpower the shadows around it. The black barely touched the color as though ceding its territory to it. Itaka's table was neat, perhaps a little too neat. Every little item was arranged perfectly. There was not a brush, not a scroll out of place. Presently, a scroll lay open on it, a brush rolling back and forth over its unfinished lines. A light breeze had snuck in and was making it restless. He seemed to have left it in a hurry. Behind the low table was an alcove and a towering rack filled with scrolls. It cast a long shadow in front that was cut up into 2 just above the red light. She wanted to sit down on the cushion by her feet, but chose to stand. Itaka preferred to sit on the tatami mat, a tradition his family upheld to this day. A powerful burst of wind played with the bamboo outside, and it smacked itself against the rocks above and below it, putting out dull sounds repeatedly. It suddenly stopped moving. Hinata moved her gaze away from the closed window, stared down, and scratched her right foot with the left. Then she lifted her eyes and looked at the clock above the rack. She had been standing here for the past 30 minutes. Taking 1 step forward, she bent down and placed the scroll on the table and stole a glance at the scroll. Sakura's name caught her eye, but, when she heard footsteps on the other side of the door, she backed away quickly. The sounds faded, replaced by the wind's whistling. Presently, sounds wafted to Hinata, faint and indistinct on breeze. She strained her ears and tiptoed to the door. Then she pulled at the door till it was slightly ajar and pressed herself against it and listened, and again, she caught the sounds of voices that broke in upon this room's silence, only this time, they made it to her ears, unobstructed by the door. You are still warm, Itaka's voice, mellowed by wind and distance, came from beyond the door down the corridor. A chink in the door allowed a sharp light to throw out its white at the wall. There, gray rippled, almost pressed against the bright knife wedged into its body. Drink this. It will ease your pain. After a slight pause, his voice came to her again, You child. What am I to do with you? Why do you not listen to me? Strange. Hinata could not hear what Sasuke said in response. Immediately, she backed away and stood by the table when she heard Itaka close the door. His footsteps grew closer and heavier with each step, as though he carried the invisible weight of his shadow along with him. A moment passed and the door swung open. Itaka's usual emotionless face greeted her, but this time, Hinata noticed a power behind his eyes as they fell on her countenance, made hazy by the shadows, and despite the missing reds from his clan, she saw something stir in the blacks for her, disgust. Hastily, Hinata bowed and muttered a greeting that was met with the same icy silence. When she looked up, that look had vanished. Why are you still here? He asked, quite suddenly, which startled her, and walked around the table. Your office hours have come to an end. He grabbed his umbu jacket, hanging from a nail on the side of the rack, and looked at her. "Why you?" She paused and thoughtlessly smoothed down the wrinkles on her jacket. "He asked me to give you the scroll." "I am sure he must have asked of you to leave the scroll on my table," he spoke and pulled his hair out from under the jacket, now fastened to his narrow waist by few buckles, a typical umbu jacket. His, however, had an umbu captain's mark, a visible black one in the shape of a shuriken, on the back. "I have few matters to attend. You may leave." With that, he cast her such an unkind gaze and walked out of the room, silence hanging from his flesh. It was said that curiosity killed the cat, and Hinata wanted to be that cat tonight, but satisfaction brought it back, too. Turning to her Byakugan, she saw the exquisite Uchiha chakra run and burn through Ataka's veins as he walked out of the main gate. His was less powerful than Suzuki's. His was in control, tamed by a colder will that granted it stillness at the cost of a restless power that Suzuki's flesh fed upon with childlike greed. His chakra, which sought an escape in his Shari-nan, would have overwhelmed the mind had it existed in another's body. Perhaps Ataka was born this way? She could not say for sure. There was no one in his house, and just beyond the door lay Suzuki, his chakra a mess of irregular currents which sped about, without a direction to their destinations. Hinata did not need to turn her head to see one servant attending to the dishes in the kitchen. She cautiously walked to the door, each step, a slow and deliberate struggle against her own nerves. If Ataka came back, who knew what he would do? Stupid, stupid. She scolded herself and puffed out her cheeks with a frustrated breath. Ataka had told her to leave, but damn that curiosity, she was a weak master of her passions. She opened the door, and a mass of white poured onto her. It was a very large room, beautiful partition screens stood behind the lanterns and delicate paper windows wore black shadows like clothes. There was a table put next to one partition screen. It was clean and tidy, and Hinata perceived in the arrangement of various articles a neatness of character. She thought she saw it that way. She turned off her Byakugan and looked at the thick quilted cake butin. It was the most beautiful one she had ever seen, and beneath it lay Suzuki. It was a traditional sleeping bed made with a set of shikibutin and makara. Ataka was an austere man. It did not surprise her that he and Suzuki preferred to live this way. Her family did, too. This was Ataka's room. Turning around, Hinata walked backwards and looked at the scroll paintings. The one behind the table, in the alcove, showed a mischievous child deity of lightning playing in the rain. She thought she saw crows under the shadows, too. Hinata spun around and gazed at the neatly arranged scrolls in the racks. Right next to the futon was another low table. A pail of water was placed on the side, and a damp cotton cloth hung from its handle. Sitting down beside Suzuki, Hinata looked at the cup. Few sips of a colorless liquid were left at the bottom. She brought her eyes upon Suzuki. He was drawing short, quick breaths, and his right hand lay trembling over his heaving breast. His cracked lips had countless red cuts. Fresh stains dappled the sides of the white makara, too. He looked weak, vulnerable, a sheen upon his forehead and a look of pain in his face. She had never seen him this way. In that moment, gripped by past passions, she leaned down and caressed his damp, hot cheeks with her lips, planting light and greedy kisses along the side of his jaw. Then her lips found his, and she kissed him deeply and relished the scent and bitter rosy taste of medicine on his tongue. Her fingers fluttered lovingly across his neck and shoulders, mapping a path along his collarbone and over the trembling, heated skin on the flesh. His vulnerability was beautiful new. When Hinata pulled back, his lips were rosed, full of heat from her kiss and of blood. A tear, thick and bloody, trailed down his cheek in answer, brought out fear on her face. Did she do something wrong? Quickly, she grabbed the cloth and wiped it away. Suzuki's eyes opened, and they bore the flower-like pattern she had seen before. Hinata staggered back when he sat upright with a speed she did not think his body possessed, not in this state. She did not even know when he moved, and she found herself being lifted off the ground, her throat in his tight-as-rope grasp. He threw her back, and she skidded across the floor and got knocked against the wall. "Suzuki?" she asked, her voice bathed in disbelief and fear. He staggered on the floor, frail from fever, his composure shattered by a lazy mingling of fear, anger, resentment. "You!" he hissed out and stopped with a harsh uttering, pained groan, and slapped his hand on the side of his face to cover the right eye. It seemed to cause him great pain. Your fath why you ruined, blood spurted out, runny and quick, from between the fingers that dug into his temple as though searching for his face. He let out another sharp hiss and slumped to the wooden floor, only to defiantly stand up again with immense speed. Lightning crackled over Suzuki's left hand and turned into his signature jutsu, Chidori. Then, as though possessed, he rushed at her, an indistinguishable blur. Hinata let out a loud scream and covered her eyes. "Suzuki, stop," Itaka spoke, and his voice made her open her eyes. He stood between Suzuki and her, Suzuki's left hand in his firm grasp, his right pushing him back. "Put it out. Calm down." In the manner of pretend play, chakra jumped to life in Suzuki's right hand, and he shot it forward with frightening speed. Itaka was fast. He grabbed hold of Suzuki's right hand, but a spear shot out from the radiating chakra's tip. He hit Suzuki's extended arm with his elbow. The spear went through the wall, an inch away from Hinata's face, and traveled zigzag at erratic angles to the right and tore into more than half of the room's walls. Hinata trembled all over. It was happening so fast. "Put it out. Listen to me," Itaka spoke, sweat dribbling from the tip of his chin. His office sandals slipped back on the smooth wooden floor and squeaked. His whole body was firm, his left arm thrust forward, to keep Suzuki at bay. Suzuki's hand trembled in his grip, and his eyes bled severely. "Suzuki, stop. Listen to your brother. Calm down." Suzuki was so frail already. Using genjutsu on him now would surely ruin him. Itaka did not want that. Tonight, words were all he had. He did not want to hurt Suzuki more, he did not want to risk it. Despite the buzzing in Hinata's ears, they did not miss the note of urgency in Itaka's voice. What was happening to Suzuki? She crawled to the right, her back was pressed hard against the broken wall, as if she was hoping for it to swallow her. "Go away. Liar!" Suzuki hissed, the character of his features carrying the profound marks of anger and fear. With great strength, which Itaka did not think he had in him, he pushed Itaka aside and rushed forward a shadow. Itaka moved faster and grabbed both of Suzuki's hands whilst he gathered up his right chakra again, in a way as though it was the easiest thing in the world, child's play. He squeezed Suzuki's wrists with greater strength and snuffed out the noisy current. "Listen to me. I will not hurt you. You have my word," Itaka assured Suzuki and twisted his wrists a little as the chakra rekindled on the fingertips. "Calm down," he added, assuaging the younger one's fears. Then he twisted Suzuki's wrists some more to stop the flow. Emitting a hiss, Suzuki sank down to the floor, wrists twisted in Itaka's hands. His fingers contorted into claws, trembling like that of a convulsing old man's. The chakra refused to go out. Despite being very ill, he released a massive right charge from the body, and still he had a near bottomless pit of chakra to spare, and to hurt his foes. The layer of impenetrable composure cracked on Itaka's face, his lips shook as the current shot deep into his body's unreachable depths. A tiny breath of pain came from Itaka's lips, and, slowly, he sank down to his knees. Had he not mastered to control chakra himself, Raiden would have burnt the flesh, stopped his heart, killed him. Suzuki's hands were still held in his. The hurting sensation loosened Itaka's grip, and Suzuki pushed him back. Itaka threw his arms across his face and braced his chakra-filled muscles. The coming current struck the front of him and cut into his arms like glass, and blood sluiced down the elbows. The impact pushed Itaka further back, but he steadied his body swiftly to catch his balance. Now, he shivered, powerful surges messing up the signals from his nerves, his body, a wonderful bundle of pain. Hinata's eyes were wide open, her mouth hanging open in mid-scream, as another blur came at her. Itaka moved faster, grabbed hold of Suzuki, pushed him against the wall. Suzuki broke free again. The whole room was like a children's theater show, a spectacle of blurs which went running all over the place, which stopped at moments to capture Suzuki's movements whilst he struggled to break free from Itaka. Against the wall, on the floor. Itaka finally managed to restrain him and threw him into the wall harshly this time. He pressed his fingers against Suzuki's brow to push his own chakra through Suzuki's damp skin, to make him lose consciousness. "Let go," Suzuki said, voice shaky and boy-like, eyes disorientated as he gasped for air, his right hand pulling Itaka's away from his face but to no avail. He was too weak, but he mustered all of his remaining strength and pushed Itaka back and vanished from the room. "Suzuki," Itaka called out behind him. He was breathing heavily, blood falling in spattering droplets from his whiter-than-Tsubaki arms. He started for the door, but stopped and turned his face soiled by wintry rage to Hinata, his eyes 2 cups of malice. "You," he let out the most frigid sound that sent a shiver galloping through to her whole heart, "leave. Now." A kunao shook in his right hand, from which carmine still came, his body indecisive. When his words struck Hinata like a blow, she scrambled to her feet and ran out. She did not stop till the walls of her empty home did not greet her. It was one of the few moments in life when she felt safe there. The night, wild, and Itaka chased Suzuki through the forest and stopped at the sight of many purple lilies growing and shining under the full moon. It looked as if a current of air was moving through a silk cloth and rippling its surface in the meadow. Suzuki lay in the middle, nearly obscured by flowers swaying. He took slow steps and knelt down beside Suzuki's trembling form. He placed a hand on Suzuki's head and stroked his hair to try and calm his reactions hopeless. Suzuki's eyes seemed to look at something beyond him, his lips moving and repeating the same words over and over again, "Autumn moth. Going for purple lilies. Moth. Lilies." The older brother, unaccustomed to an open display of emotions, pressed the back of his fingers to his lips and there was a hint of remorse upon his face. It was easy to take Suzuki back home. He was delirious and exhausted when Itaka put him to sleep. By the time he reached his Umbu office, it was nearly 2 a.m. He had changed his clothes and looked as emotionless as before. He had a trick to these things, but he was not the sharing type. His eyes fell on Sakura, who sprang to her feet when he stepped into the office. "Itaka-sama," she said in a manner as though she was announcing her presence and gave a quick bow of her head. "I hope you brought your scrolls along as I do not have the time to entertain another mishap today." He spoke and occupied the chair across the table from her. "Why yes," Sakura said, her face a little pink from embarrassment. Itaka took the scroll from her hand and read the details. "You have been training to become a censor under the censor squad captain, Sai? May I ask the reason, as you have done it without Suzuki's knowledge?" he asked, placed the scroll down on the table, and leaned back into the chair and placed his arms on the finely polished armrests. His arms were clean and white, his wounds gone. "How did?" Sakura stopped, her face breaking out in sweat. When an Umbu commander requires mission assistance from a shinobi, his records are divulged by the Hokage. "Did you think that this would remain a happy little secret?" He spoke from behind the gray in the office, eyes as black as his face. "And no, Itaka-sama," she stammered and rubbed her fingers together. "Bring your tools with you tomorrow. You will be assisting me on a mission," he spoke, his voice laced thickly with authority. "But Suzuki left, eh?" "I am handling Suzuki's missions," he cut across her. "It would be for the best if you did not question me and simply obeyed." He looked up to see a slow shiver crawl up from the base of her legs. "I apologize," she blurted out quite nervously and gave another hasty bow. "Please, forgive me. You may leave," he spoke in a flat tone of voice and watched as she left the office with an uncertain gait. He did not hold his gaze long and looked at the candle. "Learning to become a censor." He spoke to himself and then stretched his hand to put out the candle, which still stood burning on his table. Chapter 23, The Tides Change. Red stared down at her face, clothes, filling up the space between them. Then it drained away, and the room waxed into existence, his face gaining the contours, hazy and obscure a moment ago. Calm, yet a little whiter today, his face was still so like his younger siblings that it haunted her even when she was wide awake. When he spoke, a voice came from his lips, venomous words tripping from the tongue. "It is a little mark. Shinobis are accustomed to violence. You should steel yourself. It will not get better." He stretched his hand and moved her hair aside to look at her bruised neck again, red fingerprints on the fair throat wings pinned to the wall. "There is no need to call in a medic. It will heal itself." He brushed his finger against the healing skin, drawing a hiss from her, and then he drew his hand back. "Itaka-sama, I..." Hinata whispered, unsure of what to say, and fell silent again, and helpless tears threatened her composure. Suzuki attacked her, even if she had told him of her love. Her lower lip shuddered, and she felt a hard knot of pain in her heart. He did not care for her. You came in late today, Itaka spoke slowly and folded his arms across his breast. Her worries were not enough to penetrate the perfect white stone his body was sculpted from. Perhaps you are taking advantage of the leverage you have. She raised her head, confusion settling on her face. I don't under. She stopped and looked beyond the weak light of autumn sun, which came in through the window on the right. Do not play clever with me. You know why you were kept and under which circumstances you regained your post. There is no reason for me to make you recall your mishaps, he spoke, the rancor of his words hidden behind the workings of the sweetest tongue. Hinata's cheeks burnt raw with embarrassment. It was no surprise that he loathed her with all his heart. No matter how smooth his face, how controlled his passions, his words were enough to shame her. She raised her gaze a bit to look at the same uncaring visage of arrogance look back at her unflinching and unsympathetic, but there was no use arguing with the commander of all Jonin squads. No, even she was not that foolish. You have gained much arrogance overnight that an apology is beyond the horizon of your reasons. He asked in the same smooth tone as if it was a tangible leech that remained glued to his tongue, feeding off his arrogance to give off more arrogance and venom in delicious, rippling waves. Hinata stopped, and her heart tripped like a bird in a cage. I was afraid. Why, your brother, he nearly killed me yesterday. She grasped at her breast with both her hands as though stopping her heart from leaping out of her body, that needy thing that made her lust beyond reason for Sasuke. It was truly never under her control. She staggered back to catch her breath as if something knocked the wind out of her. Itaka walked through the light, and it parted open like obedient curtains that flowed to the rhythms of morning breeze. He stopped and moved down his right glove and showed her a scar that ran all the way up his arm before disappearing under the short sleeve. I received this when I was 14, he explained and moved his fingers over the scar, evoking long-forgotten memories left behind in old stitches. It was during one of my missions. The man nearly wrested my arm off. He could have succeeded had I not been swift. One misstep can throw you so far down. I can even lift my shirt and show you more on my breast, but this is not an exhibition and nor are we that intimate. He pulled the glove back up over his healed injury and regarded her with impassive eyes. But she began, breathless, eyes brimming full with tears now. But is that a defense for your unbecoming and arrogant attitude? He asked, voice thick with anger, yet smooth and unchanging. With whose permission did you cross the boundary of my chamber to disturb the boy? You were told to leave, yet you, it seems, have taken it upon yourself to cross me, disobey me, show me a persistent display of your ever-inflating ego repeatedly. He spoke, and his exquisite eyes glimmered with the Sharingan's fiercest fires that revealed the furies of his pride and passion. Itaka-sama, that's not true, she stuttered like a child and squirmed under his hard-as-stone gaze. Is it not? You have such power over me that you think yourself to have me under your little thumb. He paused and created a smile on his face that merely made a crack in his hard countenance. Let me make something very plain, Hyuga girl, I tend to prune the branches that cause me worry. He stepped away from her and leaned back against the large office table. Hinata's eyes grew wider, her eyes misted over as a tears materialized across them. She blinked and felt them crawl down her face. Her cheeks were itchy, and, hastily, she raised her hand to wipe them away. It won't happen again, I promise you, she said with sincerity and gave a bow. Your sincerity is without merit. It is as fickle as a greedy man's pride. He spoke and pressed his finger to his lips, thinking, his mouth had lost that insincere smile. Do not bring up that little mishap in front of the child. He does not need to know. Color flew from her lips. He could not be this cruel, this unjust, this blind to his love for Sasuke? You can't be? Your brother could have killed me. And you ask so much of me, Itaka-sama, she whispered the final words and bowed her head to hide her anguish. You are a strange girl. You ask for much, yet have little to offer other than your persistence to shame me. He spoke, his manner of speaking no less frigid. He cared little for her troubles. In fact, he did not care for her at all. She could rot and burn from the coldest cold in the pits of his gaze as hell for all he cared. He attacked you for he was delirious and ill. He thought you to be someone else. The Sharingan can play tricks on the mind if its chakra is disturbed. He thought I was Someone else. She said, voice tiny, to herself, face growing uncertain. There is no need to repeat things after me. It is a simple matter, he spoke, his eyes upturned to look beyond the large window at the first autumn flowers blooming on the trees that stood in the well-kept lawn. Workers hewed the wood and were cutting some parts in short sawing motions. They were building new offices for the Umbu division. It would be completed in a few months and he would shift there. This building was to be attached to the medical division in the coming months, one of the many expansion projects sanctioned by the higher UPS. I don't understand, she said, her voice and manner timid, and her shoulders slightly stooped as if bent from his weighty gaze. There is nothing to understand. Forget what happened. Had you not ventured into the chamber, he would never have been roused from sleep. You suffered through your own mistake. He attacked you for he did not know you. Shoulder the blame. It would be a great change for your spine that never bends out of the need to remain arrogant. He spoke and clenched his jaws, very softly, as if on the verge of speech, but he did not speak another word, waiting for her to say something foolish so that he could bruise her again with more cutting retorts. What if he attacks me again? I can't, Itake-sama, I can't. She protested, and her eyes roamed on his face that almost naturally mimicked his brother's features with near perfection. He was a curse upon the younger one from nature. Let me tell you a little story, Itaka began and straightened his spine. There was once a talkative monkey who spoke of things that got a child prince into a lot of trouble. When the news reached the king, he sent out some men to deal with him. Months passed and no one heard any of his foolish stories. You know why? He whispered and came closer, face hidden behind the ghastly emptiness, which clung to the approaching paroxysm of a sensation, which twitched the muscles around his mouth with thrums of another passion. He had no tongue. Hinata's eyes grew wider, her face, losing the last colors of life. Sweat came oozing from her pores, and her body shuddered with the near-exquisite urge to make itself known to her. It was still alive. The shuriken pattern in Itaka's eyes vanished, and he backed away slowly. Carry out the mission Suzuki left you. You are to make it to the border with you and 2 more Chunins and meet up with Suijutsu and Yugo. Suzuki sent them out alone. They might need assistance. Leave, he spoke and turned around to pick up his sword from the table. She did not need to be told anything twice. Somehow, she found the strength and resolve in her body to bow before him like a dutiful soldier. Then she left in silence, heart thundering inside her as though it had suffered a near miss from being nipped by the hellhound. Sunlight floated upon mist, carried away like an enthralled lover. Sounds of the release of her pent-up breaths sawed the air. Sensing was taking a lot from her strength. This was not her forte, and Itake, Leaf's Umbu commander, did not appear all that impressed. A crease disturbed his smooth brow, his face always fought vehemently against the nasty intrusion of emotions. How long have you been training? He asked, his voice several degrees colder than the indifference in his expression. Her mouth, snapped shut like an iron trap in concentration, parted to speak. I think you know, Itake-sama. She bent her eyes and made them crawl unnecessarily around her sandals. Your humor does not amuse me. Do you enjoy bypassing etiquettes? Suzuki treats you lot like children. Sometimes, his leniency surprises me. He spoke and reached to his back to pull out 3 kunous each wedged between 2 fingers. Nervously, she began to pet and pat her Chunin jacket. She wanted to speak, but the resolve to will her mouth to say something brash before this man was a terrible idea. He flicked 2 of his fingers and signaled her to get behind him. His eyes, still looking over his shoulder, urged her to use sensing again, even though she was holding onto her chakra's final threads. Sakura did not falter, pointed 2 fingers up, and concentrated on the spot beyond a thick clump of bushes about 70 feet away. Dry leaves stirred and Itaka threw 3 kunous at the tree on the right. They ricocheted off the bark and speared sharply inward. An agonizing howl struck the cold air. Itaka vanished and appeared at the spot where the ninja was hiding. Sharinan was still present in his eyes. Sakura ran behind him and stopped short of the body. Her eyes fell on the man's face. His forehead was stabbed through with all 3 of them, his face had contorted and frozen with his last battle against pain. He was dead. Her eyes traveled up to Itaka's face, who seemed to be examining the dead man's chakra as if on the verge of some amazing discovery. She did not understand why he even needed her when the Sherinon was capable of breaking through the boundaries of such distances. After breathing out a sigh, she lowered her eyes. It was some sort of test. And she failed miserably. Did Sasuke put him up to this? Anger made her tremble, and she pressed her lips together to bite back the curse words she had in store for him. He was used to shaming her. He liked to break her pride and remind her of how frigid his flesh was to her, which could not be affected by love, certainly not hers. Sakura was beginning to feel like a fish that tripped by the shoreline, inches away from tasting the waters to save itself. He was close, yet impossible to feel and touch. Her spirit broke apart under his gaze, a gaze that kept her beyond an impossible barrier he had gleefully constructed around himself. She was this intruder, a pariah, for his body that refused to relinquish itself to her. Even for a few moments of joy that would ease her worries. Oh, how she felt Sasuke was cruel to her. He would gladly bed women who enticed him, made him vulnerable in throes of late-night passions, but her? She clenched her cold-touched fingers, nails biting harshly into the flesh of her palms. Fury went rushing into her eyes, making a home in their depths, forever trapped beneath the currents of her irrepressible lust for him. Why? All she asked of him were some bits of his passion, some pieces of his lust, let them be born from dreams. She would gladly take what he would be willing to give, no more, no less. Those hours of gazing upon him, knowing that he did not want her, drove her mad and pushed her further down into the deeps of longing, and the seed of hatred for him was already sown. Sakura could feel it sprouting out from the ground of her lust, a barren land, abandoned without a touch or kiss to soothe its ache, its dried up earth, a cracked and ugly mosaic, without a drop to fill its bosom. A gluttonous need to be satisfied by him left her raw with anguish and more lust, and it grew and it spread. The reaping was at hand, and the more he pushed her away, the more it climbed, gaining heights till it would touch her heart and poison it against him. This was not how she had dreamt of things to be when she used to read folk tales in her childhood. Love was not meant to be this hard. Every girl child wished for a prince. Anger kept clinging onto Sakura's face, her eyes two wet stones. She raised them slightly to look at Itachi kneeling down beside the body. His face was affected by mourning that lent softness to his features, and his countenance touched the chords in her heart. He looked almost like Sasuke, almost, with silly missteps by nature. Now, an ocean from her pandemonium found its calm, its tides finding that perfect rhythm, their ebb and flow musical under the pull from moon. Closing her eyes, she took in a deep breath, and her nostrils flared with the sense of crushed flora beneath their sandals. He looked so like him, the next best thing. Are you lost in some paradise? Itachi asked, and Sakura snapped to attention. I asked you a question. Do you find it appropriate to continue your training as a censor? I have heard you are quite apt at breaking non-ocular genjutsu. But this will prove useful for my team, she replied and hugged herself. The temperature seemed to have plummeted. Sasuke has appointed Karen as the squad's censor, and her skill. The difference exceeds that between night and day. I am in need of a shinobi who is trained in the fields of medics and genjutsu kai, a free vacancy. You can continue training with Sarizawa. He may not be the best in the field, but he is apt for the job. He spoke and got to his feet, his face unreadable and cold as winter again. I'd like to continue. Sasuke might. You are forbidden to contact Sai again, he cut across her, his voice had that undercurrent of barbed disdain. If this is all you have learnt, your progress is unsatisfactory. You are wasting your squad captain's time. You did it without his knowledge, as well. Whilst you may have the Hokage's favor, you certainly will not have mine. And if she does play by the rules, she has no authority to override an Umbu captain's verdict. If I catch you sniffing around in his team without your captain's approval again, it will result in a swift dismissal from your post with no recourse to entreaty. Is that clear? He twisted his arm and pushed a scroll he had retrieved from the rogue's dead body into his pocket. Sakura gave a weak nod and walked behind him. Itachi had put her in a difficult situation. He stopped by the tree on the right and a crow landed on his shoulder. He looked into its eye red and his own pulsed rhythmically to life. The crow vanished, and for a moment, she caught a glimpse of a smile in the light. He took out the scroll and moved his eyes down its contents. Then he set it on fire and its ashes went away with the wind. Masks work in a right, Zabuza-san? Suijitsu asked, his voice chirpy, sipping heartily from his trusty bottle. Mate, it's so dry out here. I might evaporate. He slumped back against a large rock and heaved a sigh, and his face sagged from exertion. The rains have stopped to the south. The clouds might come here. The birds told me, Yugo said calmly and petted the head of a little bird sitting on his hand. Get that thing away from me. Suijitsu snapped at him and flailed his arms about. The bird flew up and disappeared behind the trees. The damn things poop on me head almost every day now. Ya teachin' em to shit on me head, Ansha? Don't play with me, Yugo. Why would I do that? Honestly, with Suzuki not around, you can be so silly, Suijitsu, Yugo said in the same soft tone of voice. He turned away from him and began conversing with other birds that sat in the trees overhead, singing morning songs. Suijitsu mumbled something incoherent and brought his attention back to Zabuza, who wore a completely unrecognizable face, a courtesy of Karen and her family. They created special masks made out of chakra, and no one knew about them other than some Uzumakis in her family. They hid the real faces behind a powerful seal, which was undetectable even by Sherry-nan. Where's your captain? Zabuza asked, his voice gruff and thick. He sent us ahead to make sure ya was right. His nutty brother probably caught him and beat his lil arse. Itaka can be such a tight-arsed meanie. Ya don't have to worry about him. But, Suijitsu paused and took another sip from his bottle. Ya sent him a letter through Karen. What's eatin' ya bum? This is, Zabuza said and pulled out a peculiar-looking scroll from his pocket. The mask mimicked the contours of his real face, it showed anxiety. Suijitsu stowed away his bottle and took it from his hand. Its contents surprised him. No way. Suijitsu shouted in surprise, no fucking way. That shark still lives? So May and her underlings haven't made a shark fin soup outta him yet? That sister fucking bastard. He went into peals of laughter and smacked his hand against his thigh as though it was a crude joke. There you have it, he sighed, unamused by Suijitsu's reaction. He contacted me through an unknown man. He needs help. Mist's closing in on him. It won't be long before they start sniffing around where he's hiding. He's running out of places to hide. If your boss wants to act, now would be the time. Suijitsu, you's coming this way, he's not alone. Finish this up, Yugo said from a few feet away. How long do I have to hide? Your boss said that this would be over soon, Zabuza said and flashed away from them to the other side of the stone deities that made the line of the border between this region and Rain. Just cover ya sweet lil arse for a lil while longer. Bitch won't know what hit her. Bye-bye, Zabuza-san. Suijitsu waved and crossed his legs on the boulder where he sat. Zabuza disappeared out of sight, and minutes later, Yu and Hinata, along with two Chunins, jumped down from the trees. Hinata looked a little out of breath, but she regained her composure quickly. You guys all right? Yu asked, putting away his kunao. Hold on to ya pussies, our ninja in shiny armor is there. Suijitsu shouted, his hands flying out as if he was falling, we're saved. Oh, for sage's sake. Yu muttered and kneaded his brow. Pick up your stuff and get going. Itaka-sama has cancelled all of your missions. Come on, let's go. He flicked his head to one side, urging Yugo and him to follow the team. Suijitsu hopped off the boulder and thrust the scroll into his fanny pack. He's cancelling all of the missions? I don't like this. It'd be impossible to contact May like Suzuki asked, Yugo whispered, towering over the shorter man. I know Itaka's actin' like a meanie again, Suijitsu said, his face uncustomary serious. Let's just go. No use stickin' around and drawin' suspicion. He started for the group walking ahead, but stopped to look up at the crow staring down at them from its perch far up in the tree. Its neck was stretching out oddly. He paid it no mind, for now, and resumed his walk. Chapter 24, The Rat That Got Away. Morning came and went. Today was a holiday and most ninjas were in their homes. Rains had stopped, and streets were brimming with people. Noises rose and fell upon the afternoon air's warm currents. Standing close to the window, Hinata caught a whiff of spices from the shops, tucked underneath the upper story of the inn. She had decided to leave home and rent a room for a week. The 3 missions she completed recently earned her a little bonus. Itake was brutal, but he did not withhold her pay. Her cheeks tightened in a grimace. He hated her, but she was damn sure that the feeling was mutual. She clenched her fingers, but when she saw the village again at a glance from above, the feeling left, floating out of her body, akin to a wayward ghost. She had never done much for herself. Her life was always a rush and flurry of silk through the nettles. It was pleasant to be out of her home, without any worries just this once. Looking outside again, she saw that the light on the horizon was slowly losing its golden glow and turning orange. Shopkeepers were lighting the lanterns outside their shops. Purple, red, blue, pink. A haze of many colors that would only find their strength at night. They would glow as flowers once night would descend upon them spring at night. Moving away from the window, Hinata cast herself on the bed and rolled onto her back. Her eyes roamed about the room. For the amount she paid, this was a steal. The bed was big and comfy for one person, racks, large enough to house her belongings, her modest array of clothes, a partition screen hid the room's far corner. Her ninja clothes were thrown over it haphazardly. She caught a glimpse of black feathers painted on the screen's surface, but she could not make out the whole pattern. It was a black and white ink painting. Her eyes ran from looking at the blackbird's feathers to staring directly at the table. The breeze coming in through the window passed over it, drying the ink on the official letter she had written to Suzuki, a permission to join the training squads for the Chunin trials. A sigh spilled from her lips, a defeated sigh. Itake's words, incessant noises of insects in her ears, gnawing at her brain. Suzuki attacked me cause he was ill. Hinata reassured her heart that would not listen. Fragile. It was never in the will's grasp. Spirit's unruly, stubborn bit. He had no reason to kill her. In her memory, his face was set and broken, his eyes, a void. The words he wanted to say to her. Anger, fear had robbed him of a voice. Whose father ruined his life. For the first time in their strange relationship, she had taken a glimpse at the man behind his face. What else was he hiding from her? He was a stranger to her, she did not know him, not one bit. Maybe she was running ahead of herself, thinking that her words were enough to make him open up to her. She never thought they would sit under a tree, a bloom at the glade's heart, so soon and exchange family grievances. Hinata sighed again, a little loudly this time. Itake had closed that door in her face, it was shut forever. Suzuki's moment of vulnerability was gone, lost behind the mishap she had created. She moved her hand and played with her hair, her thoughts running ahead of her heartbeats. Why did he not want Suzuki to know? The thought was bugging her, burrowing under the skin, prodding her to do something rash and foolish again. A cat yearned for another satisfaction, but she had made a promise to the older one. She would be a good girl and let Suzuki reach out to her again. She would not misbehave out of the need to be a curious little girl, but the curiosity to know. How would she even bring it up? Suzuki, you tried to kill me. I hate you, but who destroyed your precious life? The voice of reason laughed at her, its words intimate with mockery, it sneered with the kind of contempt Itake harbored. Loathsome girl. Hinata had heard Itake whisper as she left his office. Angered, she ground her teeth. He made no secret of his loathing of her natural passions, his disdain grated on the little pride she had left, last vestiges of her clan's might. He was a hateful man who had wrenched the younger one's heart from her hands, she could not forgive him for that. How her heart and body waited for Suzuki now, at the threshold that was new. She had not seen him in many days. How was he? Had his fever cooled through the nights that autumn nurtured, leaving him as uncaring as before? Did he dream of her whilst he lay shivering like children beneath the quilt, burdened by the dreams of his tormentors and foes? Ah, silly girl, she craved his intimacy, needed that little attention, loved to feel. Wanted distance and time, and that villain Itake, too, had parted her from him, but the ache rose within, a loud noise. The flare, surge of it inside, cracking the walls of the little composure she had learned to craft for herself. She was such a girl, and she would not last long without the press of his flesh against hers. Her new life. Tamed by passion, a love, as she had named it. And she hated it, this feeling of need that ripped at her senses apart, shredded her nerves to itty-bitty pieces. Now that Hinata had tasted the pleasures he offered, it was impossible for her feet to tread back. It is wrong, she told herself in her mother's long-forgotten voice. But it is right to feed your passions, the other voice whispered heatedly. A paroxysm of desire seized her body and mind. The woman's voice in her always triumphed, overpowered the girl's whispers of regret and betrayal. Oka-san. Why does it matter? Hinata thought to herself as she undid the obi of her kimono and moved the collars aside to bare her body to the wind, ignoring the voices, locking them up again in the dark corners of her mind where they would remain, talking amongst themselves, shouting themselves hoarse. Their words rang hollow. She hooked her finger underneath the waistband of her underwear and dragged it down to her thighs. The breeze, touched by dusk's chill, came at the naked parts of her a cold sensation against the burning and exquisite fever rising under the skin. Hinata closed her eyes and joyous sensations crept into her pores, little crawly insects, they stung and they bit as she moved her hand over her breasts and trailed her fingers down across her belly. Her fingers tangled in the pubic hair, and she moved them lower still. Moved them down along her folds, and then she plunged a finger into her slit and caught a shaky release of breath in a sigh. All alone, no one would see her now, it felt good. The other free hand roved over her torso, soothed the aching sensation from her taut muscles. At that moment, she moved her finger faster, and her throat spasmed as though she was straining her head to breathe above the surface, after a swim. She twisted the pebbled peak between her fingers, her body shuddering from the lovely sensations. It did not take long for a hot spark to strike her at the core, jolting her there. A spray. And she felt the warmth on the fingers. Hinata opened her mouth and swallowed up the air in the room, face trembling from the high. As if in a stubborn mood, she sat up straight and wiped her hand on the kimono. Yes, why did it matter? A smile crossed her pink face as she looked outside the window. Night had returned, it had come at last. Freedom was a precious thing. Right, Oka-san? She wanted to ask, but she was only a dead and gone woman. Night came upon them, cast its shadows that ran away, hid like children as pale lights from the new crescent moon descended. Wind remained low in the forest, thick with the odor of decaying flowers and leaves. Autumn was that child reaper that sliced off the heads of youth, nature's own style of merciless reaping. The warm sun had sucked up the moisture from the ground and left the leaves by their feet dry. They crackled as their sandals crushed and crunched them without an ounce of mercy. The naked branches overhead were the perch of many owls. They hooted, their yellow eyes glowing in the darkness. Beckoned by night's love, the forest had come alive again. Rains had withdrawn their tight grasp, a few days of respite for the land. Purple lilies, young and excited, grew out from the rich soil, welcoming a kinder moon's arrival. They thrived in these corners, the foot of the trees abloom with their purple glow, their delicate mouths wide open and eager to gorge on moonlight. Growing children, they needed their meals. It was an enchanting sight that compelled the man walking ahead to stop in his tracks. He knelt down and plucked one, his face blank. "Takin one for Suzuki, Itaki-sama?" Suijitsu asked from behind him. He wore his ready-made mischievous face. Itaki stood up straight and slowly turned around. A ghostly smile disturbed his features, sharing on alive and well in the eyes. "Hand over the scroll, Suijitsu," he spoke, his voice steeped in his customary, languid drawl. Suijitsu lost that cheeky expression for a moment, stunned. Then, as a realization dawned on him, it returned to his face with full force. He let out a gulping laugh, and in the forest, it was loud. "Was wonderin' what this wild goose chase was 'bout, and in this part, too. Ya sneaky, Itaki-sama," he said and tapped his finger against the side of his head. "The night runs ahead of us. Do not waste time," Itaki spoke, his face becoming a blank slate, awaiting the touch from something, anything subtle. "Ya crows are everywhere," Suijitsu broke off and reached into his fanny pack. "It ain't nice to spy on unwary folk." "Ya mean?" Itaki merely smiled in reply. His pale face, laden with crooked shadows of the boughs overhead, was hard to read, the visible patches of his body, white as moon that he looked like its creature. He waited for Suijitsu to hand it over. Suijitsu turned the scroll in his hand as if he had just stumbled on it. He looked indecisive. He flashed Itaki a clever grin and said, "If ya promise not to kill me dead, might I ask something pretty please?" Why do ya need it? Sasuke would be bloody mad if he found out, yeah no. This should not concern you. Curiosity is a terrible business. It gets many people into a lot of trouble, Itachi spoke, and his voice had that serrated edge of frostiness that was hard to miss. That's all fine and dandy, but yeah no, I gotta answer to Sasuke, too. Ya lil brother's not the type to let things go. And from the looks of it, neither is ya, Suijutsu said and threw the scroll up into the air and then caught it again as gravity pulled it down. You already sent the missive into the system? He asked, his brow disturbed by a single line of irritation. Course I did. Suijutsu said, his voice approaching a shout as if he was being accused of someone's heinous murder and this was his only chance to come clean. I doubt even yet is the time or the patience to go through thousands of coded scrolls to find Sasuke's. Pretty neat, huh? He asked you to send in a coded message. Of course, Itachi sighed and closed his eyes. This child. I hope ya not going to try to genjutsu me. They don't work on us. Water, yeah no. Suijutsu said with a wide wave of his hand as though it was not obvious enough. Or burn me, but that would be crazy mad AF yeah. His face suddenly turned a little wary, and he took a single step back as if that would save him from Mangekyo's wrath. I could, Itachi spoke in a softer voice, softer than the calm sea waves, but I am not in any mood to push Sasuke. It will anger him more. You are lucky. Suijutsu could tell that he was amused. An owl loudly hooted, and a sudden surge of wind at Suijutsu's back shook the leaves that crackled and spun about upon the ground. Handlin, like how ya keep genjutsuin, he asked. I know the mind has a tendency to wander, but I told you never to bring that up again, Itachi paused and heaved a sigh. Do not compel me to try it out on you. Suijutsu shook his head, chuckling. Scary. He said and leaned back against the dried-up tree behind him. I'm saying that it ain't nice. Ya have a better genjutsu, but he's got the better set of eyes. How long do ya think this'll work? He'll keep it in ya back. What will ya do when the floodgates open? He's going to get bloody mad at ya. He grinned and showed pointy teeth that flashed in the moonlight. I see that staying here has made a scholar out of you, Itachi retorted, a cunning look coming into his face, occupying its every vein, every fiber with haste. I'm just warnin', ya, Suijutsu began. His smile had vanished, things, ave away af comin' out. Me pa used to say that nothing stays a secret forever. Last time, he was wanderin' like a mad ol' codger across Rain's border. That's when I found he was utterin' gibberish. He doesn't even know about me first mission. Some fucker could have killed for his eyes, but ya two are so stubborn. Ya a hard arse for discipline in and he's just as bad for not obeyin'. Ya got to draw a line somewhere. He finally threw the scroll at Itachi. Are you suggesting me something? An advice, perhaps? Believe me, those days are not yet upon me. He spoke sardonically and opened the scroll to read the details, his eyes roaming between Suijutsu's serious face and the hideout's location. I ain't suggestin' nothin', boss. I'm just askin' ya ta cool it. Ya put under genjutsu every time things get out of hand, and then ya put funny things in his head. Kinda creepy for a thin like bro love, don't ya think? Suijutsu asked and winced when Itachi burnt the scroll. Sage's pooper. Sasuke's goin' to give me a big and new one for this, he muttered out the corner of his mouth. Itachi did not say anything and started walking ahead into the forest's deep. The light was sparse here, the ground, a black mass. Itachi kindled a flame upon his palm, breaking out a fresh light. He saw an opening between two stones. It would have been impossible to spot without his Sharingan. He stepped through the opening, Suijutsu trailing right behind him. Smells like a cave between a bitch's legs fishy. Get it? Suijutsu joked and pinched his own nose. When Itachi did not answer, his smile sagged. Smells never mind. A click resounded like a single drum beat, and, without a sound and warning, two razor-sharp fast wires passed right through Suijutsu, splashing water all over the place. He looked up to find Itachi stretched across a little gap in the roof above, his hands and sandals plastered against the rough stones, with chakra. He had evaded it. Thanks for the warning. Suijitsu muttered and solidified his body. Good thing that you are made out of water, Itaka spoke and came down smoothly, otherwise, I would not have sent anyone in here to clean up your messy leftovers. Hey, me mum thought I was special. He made a childish expression and then looked around. Chuckerless traps the fish brain AF his works. Itaka walked deeper into the cave. It was clammy and dank. Water dripped down from the holes overhead, and tree roots protruded through the cracks. He disarmed several more traps till he came across another opening. The area ahead was well lit with candles that stood burning in the crevices. A few well-worn clothes were left haphazardly behind on the verdure-covered floor. Itaka picked one up and smelt it, it stank of fresh sweat. The man had been here not long ago. Then why did he leave? He looked around, and the chakra pulsing behind his eye that was used to calling upon the flames from hell cooled down. He was prepared to kill him here and now and end it all. He left here not long ago. Someone warned him that I was coming, Itaka spoke, his eyes searched the cave, but found nothing, and then they settled on Suijitsu. Don't look at me, he said, picked up fish bones from a broken plate, and turned them around as if hopeful for a little piece of meat hanging between their gaps. I gave ya the only connection I had with him. Looks like he moved ahead just in case. Who knows what goes on in a fishy's lil brain? Maybe cause of me? She'd bite ya cock off and ya sleep a total bitch. Yes, who knows, Itaki repeated, looking very amused. He walked out of the makeshift room Kisame had made out of gaps and stones, his inner sanctum. I saw ya go mad angry that day in the rain. Suijitsu whispered as Itaka vanished behind the shadows. Then he started walking behind him. His body ached, feverish with the struggle to break free. A single point in his consciousness opened up, a lily bright purple in the endless, hungry for light. He felt as if he did not have a spine as he writhed beneath the quilt. A single web of courage and strength, which a spider had woven and thrown down from the maw's mouth above him, was at arm's reach. He took it in his shivering hand and climbed out, and his eyes opened with a shudder. Chapter 25, Trouble Amongst the Clans. What are you saying? Niji asked and his face changed with shock. What are you asking of me? Thunder chattered and rocked the whole place as though they all sat on a piece of an uncertain land, right in the storm's eye, and it had caught on to their little schemes. Night was upon them, a wildling clutching its prey that was bright, slaying it without sorrow. Stars blinked, hidden behind nature's meanness, scared children fearing punishment for their misdeeds, their twinkle snuffed out by a swathe of clouds painted black by night, wind hot on the heels of lightning. It was a stormy night, indeed. I can't do this, Niji said firmly, and his voice rose resolutely above the wind. Niji, you are Naruto's friend and Hinata's cousin. What better man to entrust this task with? Minato spoke gently, his right hand resting on his thigh. Next to him, Kushina nodded in agreement. Her demeanor was a display of an uncertain calm, a sure smile broke her face. Niji was not fooled by its trickery. Forgive me, Minato-sama, Niji paused, his jaw set, but it isn't a simple matter. You're asking me to spy on my cousin, on Naruto, and report back, to you, the details of their private affairs? It's unthinkable. What do you take me for? A petty family spy to ensure your clan's futures? The matter had set his nerves on edge. A slave to the end, huh? A whiplash, an honor that had to be reclaimed, and what a time it was to do just that. It is not like that, Hayashi spoke from across the table. Shadows seemed to have perched on his face. We need someone we can trust. A man who is one of us. Someone they trust, as well. If we do not get an heir, our families have met their ends. Hanabi will bear the Hyuga clan's burden. Hinata had to be the one to carry on Namikaze's future. You will not be doing this for them, you will be doing this for our future. Try to understand our position. Niji let out an impatient sound, his fingers crooked on his thighs. He breathed heavily for some moments and located the courage inside to speak out, then he settled his eyes upon Hayashi, his dead father's keeper, and words leapt to his quiet tongue. Why do you want to spy on your daughter? Does this seem reasonable to you? Hayashi breathed out a loud sigh and put his hand on his forehead. Tsunade has sent us a missive that she is unwell to bear children and needs to recover, but she is doing missions under that Uchiha's supervision. Naruto hardly stays at home. He seems too busy with his paramour to go near Hinata. He spoke and saw shock come into Niji's face from behind the curtain of receding shadows. Paramour? What do you mean? Niji asked and bent forward, trying to take a good look at Hayashi's face. It was difficult without his Byakugan to see a man's face that was shrouded in darkness. Maybe it always had been, a man blind to the nephew, his Byakugan, an uncaged bird, had only nurtured that apathy. Naruto has been, Kushina stopped and clasped her fingers tightly together, intimate with Sakura for quite some time. He wanted to marry her, but he had a responsibility. It could not happen. A Harano clan's daughter is not worthy of my son. A quick light splashed across Niji's face. How long have you all known? He asked, his voice small and uncertain, and looked from the face hidden behind the darkness to the man and woman sitting in front of him in the lantern's light. What a play, what a revelation, a man languishing in their shadow. He has been with her for a few years. He had no desire to stay in the marriage. I suspect he did it to hurt us. He wanted to end it, be free, as he said to us, but we could not allow it. It is a complicated matter. Kushina's voice, gentled by restraint, trailed off. I don't believe this. Niji sighed out and buried his face in his hands. It all seemed to come together, Hinata's gloom, Naruto's disinterest in his married life, and his parents. Both wanted to break away from the fate's trappings. It was in man's nature to flee. Niji lowered his eyes and caught sight of a pink moth, a youngling, that writhed on the mat by his folded knee. It twisted around in pain, a dull and thin line of smoke rose from its scorched wings. It must have thought the purple light overhead to be a lily. After some moments, it went still. The spectacle of death had come to a close. He raised his eyes, breaking his gaze from Kushina's face and bringing it forcefully upon Hayashi's. The shadows haunting him had receded back when the flame on the wick gained height, painted his sober face, an aura that looked at odds with nearly half his face. I won't be a part of this, Niji whispered, voice dulled by rising fury. Niji, Hayashi spoke with an air of impatience, and his face turned an ugly shade of purple down the neck. You are the branch family's heir and my nephew. If I cannot trust you, who can I trust? Niji lifted his hands and pulled off the headband to reveal a fading seal. Gasps rose from their lips at the sight of it. Only a glimmer of it remained on Niji's brow, a vestige of many things. Evil, as banal as time. It was almost gone, fading away as if yielding its territory to something strong. I'm no longer the head of an inferior family. This caste system will exist no more, he said, anger in his firm voice and etched into his young face. Hayashi slumped forward and braced his hands on his thighs. You accepted Tsunade's proposal to remove the seals? He asked in such a defeated voice that it barely made it to Niji's ears. He looked up, face painted by anguish's brush. Why? Niji got to his feet and shoved his headband into his pocket. It was dark, the shadows would hide the mark of his clan's shame. Ever since the time of my great-grandfather, we've been nothing but your unwilling armors. No more, he stopped, breast heaving with emotion, no more. My father lost his life to save you and your family. My family will do your bidding no longer. Niji, Minato spoke and rose to his feet, this is unfair to Hayashi. You should not think this way. We need your support, and I won't spy on your son. Do you care for him? Don't you feel anything for him? He asked, looking at the changing character of Minato's features. He turned his eyes to Hayashi, whose face was lashed by disbelief's whip. And you? Hinata's your daughter. How can you do this to her, leave her to rot on Leaf's borders, with no aid from you? Hayashi's eyes misted over and his cheeks tightened and he lowered his head to hide the shame shining on his cheeks. He was silent, head bowed as if in a silent apology. Too little, too late to bring his younger brother back from the dead, sacrificed to save his clan's reputation, but it did not thaw the layer of an unforgiving emotion on Niji's face. Niji, you must understand, Kushina spoke and clamped her hand on Minato's arm, this matter is delicate. You need to listen to us. Naruto is fragile. He might. I don't have to listen to this. I told you, I have nothing to do with your family's legacies. I've got my own to think of a clan you all threw away, Niji said and calmed his ragged breaths. He turned away and started for the door. Hayashi got to his feet and stretched out his hand. Niji, wait. He fell silent, unable to weave his thoughts into words. Niji looked over his shoulder, his eyes softening to the purple light. They strayed toward that moth again, it lay still and crumpled where it had died. He did not say anything and left the room in silence. Hayashi, this cannot go on. You have to speak to Hinata. She has a responsibility to her clan, to you, and to us. She is not in your control. You need to discipline her. What will become of the essence inside Naruto? It needs to be passed on to find its balance. All that trouble, that shame, that slaughter. It had been for nothing. Minato spoke and put his hand on Kushina's trembling fingers, clasped around his arm. Hayashi slumped down to the floor with a sigh as though he had just experienced great defeat in battle. He looked up at the other man, sharing the secrets and sins with him in his summer's sky-blue eyes. Absent-mindedly, Hayashi nodded and spoke, I will. This cannot go on like this anymore. Another sound shook the room again, and then it was silence once more. When all things were said and done, when all lies concealed, what would be left behind to shelter his passions? His gait was graceful, each step deliberately measured and weighed by his Sharingan to guide its way. He was a perfect man, perfect in appearance, in intellect, and even in the concealment of lies. Yes, Itachi was a perfect man and a perfect liar. Nothing escaped his Sharingan whilst he walked against the autumn wind, picking up the pace. Dry leaves and dead sakura flowers, spring's remnants, whirled about him in the air, such a rush to be swept away by the swooning winds. He could count them all, 1, 2, 3, 15, 50. He lowered his eyes and looked down at the familiar path that led to his home. Light danced overhead and glimpsed like blue insects at the sky's far end. A little part of his sword, peeking out from above the sheath, shone in the blue light. The mission for today had come to an end, but his burdens did not. He would not let his back stoop to protect his pride, but what to do? What to do? His cunning eyes darted from corner to corner as though in search of an intruder who threatened his calm. It was a habit he had developed ever since he joined Umbu. Even a short walk back home was a tedious journey. Every nook and corner had to be investigated for spies. Back in the day, when he was newly appointed, he used to kill several assassins every week. Their numbers dwindled, and then, they stopped coming. Itachi emitted a white breath and then breathed in deeply the autumn air. A metallic object hanging at the door of someone's house musically clanked as wind brushed past it. Its sound stopped him in his tracks, and his eyes located a forgotten well, obscured by grass a few feet from him. Suddenly, his mind took a trip down memory lane, and his Sharingan cast an illusion about him, throwing him back nearly 16 years into the past. Sasuke sat in the grass with his back pressed against the well. He had his knees clasped together, small arms hugging them close to his breast. His Genin Academy bag lay abandoned by his feet. Sasuke, Itachi spoke his name, pulling the boy's eyes to himself. Why are you sitting here? It's past 5 p.m. You must be hungry. Come on, let me take you home. I don't want to go home, Sasuke answered, his small voice, smaller than usual. Leaves cast the coming evening's shade upon his lily face, enveloped by a child's sorrow. What's wrong? Itachi asked and sat down beside him. Did someone say something to you? You can tell me and I'll punish him. He gave a reassuring smile and stroked Sasuke's messy hair. His shadow loomed over the little boy. Itachi was quite tall for his age. Hesitating for a moment, he turned his face to Itachi, his cheeks flushing from heat. It was a little warm today. Oto-sama didn't even look at my test. He doesn't care about me, he said, his little voice set in full of anguish, and then turned his face away. Itachi saw his tiny pink mouth quiver as he squeezed his eyes shut. The tears stung on his hot face. Sasuke. Itachi brushed the tears away and pushed his sweaty hair aside. He's a busy man. You know this. Where's your test? Let me see. He stretched his arm and pulled out the paper sticking out from between the scrolls. A perfect score. I'm proud of you. Sasuke's face lit up, and he looked into Itachi's eyes, a bit curiously. You are, Nii-san? You're not lying, right? He asked, as if unsure of his brother's honesty. Of course not. You're my brother. Why would I lie to you? He said softly and wiped away fresh tears shimmering in the sun's last lights. Come on, let me carry you home. Reassured that his brother was being honest, he let Itaka pick him up. Itaka flung Suzuki's bag over his shoulder, slipped one arm under Suzuki's buttocks, and slipped the other one behind his neck. Lifting Suzuki up, Itaka started walking. Suzuki circled his arms around Itaka's neck, breast pressed against his brother's, heart beating loudly. Nii-san, I want to be like you, he whispered close to Itaka's ear, his cheek pressed into the crook of his brother's neck. You're perfect, Nii-san. When I grow up, I'll be just like you. I'll work hard to be like you. Oto-sama loves you and he said no more, still distressed. You don't have to be like me, Suzuki. You are you, he reassured him again and moved his hand up to press Suzuki firmly to himself as he opened the gate. See, we are home. You should. He paused and turned his head slightly to look at Suzuki. He had fallen asleep. Itaka closed his eyes. The memory ended. The illusion ended. Time had cast a different shadow all around. It was a memory relived under the darkness of this sky. Somehow, his feet had found their way back home, retracing the path like a routine ritual. He never thought that in those childhood confessions lay the absolutes of honesty. He tilted his head back and felt the chill from night crawl upon his skin. Perhaps it was his fault that Suzuki forever chased the idea of him a symbol of perfection. Somewhere down the road, a boy had forgotten himself, overlooked the mask of perfection Itaka wore to hide his true nature. Suzuki had tempered his own innocence and beaten it out of himself to mold it in Itaka's image. Standing still, Itaka felt the softness of rain on his unyielding skin. It deceived him to tremble at the sensations, a slit in the visage. It readjusted itself quickly to appear indifferent again, but in him raged an ocean of memories. Suzuki was slipping out of his hands. Itaka felt as though he was standing on the brink of a frightening precipice, staring down at the darkness by his feet. It was barbed and alive, lit on his secrets and sins. He had little remorse for his deeds. They were his duties, choices to protect the village as its uncompromising soldier. And his brother. Yes, he would do anything for Leaf, betray his clan, his loyalty to family, and break free from the precepts of innocence. His fire for Leaf, a towering aggression, his love for Suzuki, a sacred obsession. These were disgraceful sentiments if he had nothing to protect, if he did not have a passion to occupy his heart. His greed was without will, and it was his heart that drove his spirit, his soul that existed in winter's stillness. Obsession was divine will, human. And what were notions of martyrdom without obsessions? You could not be divine with the human in you. How would he protect if Suzuki lost himself to truth? The visage yielded before uncertainty for just a moment. Waves of distress biting away at his insides slammed against the composure, but it was too stubborn for them to break through, tear it apart, and spill out over his face to consume him for a moment's victory. No, he would do everything to shield Suzuki from the truth, protect the bond forged in innocence between them. Suzuki did not have to know everything, it was for his own good. Taking a long intake of breath, as if the matter was settled, Itaka stepped inside the manor. The servants had lit the lanterns. The Uchiha symbol glowed behind the lantern in the entrance's alcove. He looked at it for a moment, as though interested in the fan's red and white glow, and took off his sandals. The chill was trapped behind the door. Faded and hushed sounds of rain permeated the space about him. Itaka opened the clasp of his sheath and grabbed hold of the sword. The rack on the right had the weapons he and Suzuki used for their missions. He placed the sword on the rack. When his gaze moved in the direction of his room, his eyes pulsed to life. Suzuki. He whispered and flashed to his brother, a crumpled figure by the open door. He knelt down and grabbed Suzuki by the shoulders. Suzuki, speak. What is wrong? Suzuki. Suzuki lifted his head, his eyes unable to decide the pattern they wanted to wear as they fluctuated hastily between the ring of tomos and petals of eternal light. Itaki had been too hard, too cruel this time. Nii-san, he breathed out weakly, face enveloped by a boy's grief, have you ever had the urge to let it go? Itaka did not know what to say. He kept looking at Sasuke, boyhood's innocence apparent on his face without that mien of mimicry. I remember I visited the graves and I went out on a mission that day. I was hanging by a thread, looking down at the ocean. Waves crashing on the rocks. Smell of salt. I wanted to let go. Free. I hate this burden. I don't know what to do. San, what should I do? He grimaced, like a frightened boy, eyes brimming with tears, and leaned into Itaka's breast. To hide his countenance. You are my flesh and blood and I am your anchor. Even if you end up hating me, it would not matter, for that is what older brothers are for, to bear the hate and be their brother's armor. Itaka spoke, which seemed like utmost honesty to the younger one's ears, and stroked Sasuke's head with affection. He had to find Kisame before Sasuke. Truth was never a necessity. Tsunade-sama, can't you do anything at all? Sakura pleaded. Autumn's night was a child perched on Sky's throne, but Sky was hidden behind the clouds, an unwary darling, shielded ruthlessly by storm's curtains. I wish I could, but Itaka's written a detailed report. He's the Umbu captain, and that boy is very thorough. Sage knows he never leaves any loopholes behind for anyone to get around. I can't override his decision under these conditions. If you want to learn more, take the opportunity he's offering you. You're a gifted medic and hold great mastery over Genjutsu Kai. It wouldn't hurt to hone your skills, Tsunade said from across the large table. It had some unsigned scrolls lying open on its surface. Sakura heaved a sigh, her eyes downcast, and looked around at the new mat spread over the floor. The office was being renovated. Racks, cupboards, and even the large table were new. She breathed in the overpowering smell of fresh paint and coughed. It was unbearable to stand in the office. This would give you the time to separate yourself from Sasuke and think for yourself, Tsunade said and gazed at the shocked expression on Sakura's face. She was not expecting this honesty from her mentor. Tsunade-sama, she stopped and lowered her eyes in shame. There's no need to hide it. I know you have strong feelings for him, but that's clouding your judgment. Why don't you tell Itaka? He should know that you failed the tests because you were making a poison's antidote for Fu under Danzo's orders. I'm sure he can make Sasuke understand. Good sage, that wild boy can't even be controlled by anyone but Itaka, she said, her brow knitting with irritation. The Uchiha brothers were these two boy-like imps in her eyes, unreasonable, secretive, hard-headed. It was a classified mission. I was told not to tell my captain. I don't think there's any need to tell Itaka-sama. I've passed my tests, Sakura answered, eyes still lowered before the Hokage's kind gaze. Tsunade sighed and lifted herself up with great difficulty. Sitting in the chair all day long was hardly her idea of a decent job. She walked to the closed window and opened it a little to let fresh air in. It hit the side of Sakura's face and cooled beads of sweat standing on her skin. She shivered, took in a gulp of air, exhaled as hard as she could. It was a good idea to air the room. I'm giving you an honest advice. Forget about Sasuke, she broke off, and then she turned around to face her student and meet her green eyes, glazed over with fresh tears. He doesn't love you. He'll never love you. You're wasting your life away, chasing after this boy who doesn't care for you. He comes into this office? The way he speaks of you? There's nothing but contempt in his eyes. The sooner you realize this, the better. Sometimes, when our hearts are broken, we go down the paths. Do things, bad things. From where there's no coming back. Get out of this mess. That's all I'm going to say. Tsunade kept her gaze settled upon Sakura. She was weeping in the light from the lantern. The grieving girl raised her head, her face ruined by tears. She took in a shuddering breath and spoke in a wavering voice, strained by her youthful passions, losses, and fears. Thank you, Tsunade-sama. You're kind. Tsunade took a few steps and clamped her hand on Sakura's trembling shoulder. I know it's hard, but you have to let go. Let him go, Sakura. For Sage's sake, you're only 25. You have a whole life ahead of you. Don't ruin it by running after a shadow. Take this chance Itaka's offering you, and you can apply anywhere you want in the country. You can get away from this place, away from Sasuke, and start over, Tsunade said and stroked Sakura's hair. Sakura did not say anything in response. Could she really break free from him? The thought hit her hard. He was a sturdy, unrelenting noose, an unbreakable ghost wrapped round her flesh and spirit. She was his prisoner. Would she ever be able to run without wounding her heart? Her heart thundered as she thought of the next best thing, and she felt his hold on her loosen just a little. Check the description for the links to the author.